Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making millions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/hidden. Protect yourself now at aura.com/hidden.
A text says, "You're on my mind." A bouquet from 1-800-Flowers says, "You're my everything." Heartfelt moments belong in the real world, not just your phone. For 50 years, 1-800-Flowers has helped millions of people make memories that'll last a lifetime with gifts they'll cherish forever. Their expertly curated arrangements and gift baskets ship nationwide with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Don't wait for the next big moment. Make it when you visit 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
According to data from our 2025 General Homebrewer Survey, 68% of respondents reported that they started off homebrewing using malt extract in one form or another. When asked what their current approach to brewing is, less than 4% said they still use extract. That's quite a swing and would seem to suggest that malt extracts are viewed as more of a beginner ingredient, likely because of the mashing process, or at least, to some people, that mashing process seems convoluted. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott. And today I am joined by contributor Will Lovell to share our experiences as well as some patron experiences brewing with malt extract.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I got my start using malt extract, and even today I kind of use it as kind of a Band-Aid where I might fail in gravity readings and some other things. And so whether you use it for the whole fermentability of your batch, or you just use it to kind of make up for some fermentability that you may have lost somewhere and lost efficiencies, I think it's still a great tool and something really amazing that we have in our tool belts to use when it seems appropriate. And so I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, for these experience episodes, we do our best to focus on our actual experiences with whatever the topic at hand is. Unlike our Brews View series, where we unabashedly share our opinions on a specific topic. Well, I have a feeling this one's going to be a bit of a hybrid because for whatever reason, malt extract is nearly impossible to talk about without getting at least somewhat opinionated or making it seem to others that we're just sharing opinions. So this is going to be kind of, like I said, kind of a hybrid. Also, like I mentioned earlier, we did make a point of asking our patrons for their experiences using malt extract. And again, you're going to notice that some of them kind of share some opinions along with that as well. But our main focus is on just the experiences in general, what we found works, what we found doesn't. So we're going to be getting into all of that. I look forward to it as well. Now, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor. These are a lot of fun, and this is the primary way that we're able to keep doing this these days with where the industry, the beer and brewing industry is at. So you also have a chance by being a patron to have your thoughts shared on episodes like this, which we think is pretty cool. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And when you make that pledge, just know that you are responsible again for us doing this thing that we do. Huge thanks to all of our current patrons. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support. When you're shopping online, your experience doesn't change at all. And we get a little kickback for that referral. Again, thank you to everybody who's been using those links and bookmarking them. It does help. Not huge help, but it does, every little bit counts, right? All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who in addition to having a remarkable YouTube channel chock full of great brewing related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120 volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240 volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Tristan left a comment on Spotify after listening to episode 416, where we talked about pressurized warm fermentation of lagers. Tristan said, pressure itself doesn't slow the yeast down directly. It's the increased CO2 in solution caused by that pressure that inhibits yeast replication and the byproducts that come with that. I believe I read somewhere that yeast really start to die at around 3,000 plus PSI. Like your lab results showed, I really don't think yeast gives a damn what a pressure of 13 PSI or 0 PSI. What are your thoughts, Will?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of pressurized fermentation. In fact, what kind of, I think, gave me I think like a lot of people, I kind of started doing warm lager fermentation with pressure, and it's kind of what gave me the boldness, the resolve to do it warm. And then as you kind of go along and I started doing some pressurized fermentation versus just doing it warm without any pressure, I couldn't really tell a difference, at least not at like the 10 to 15 PSI that I was doing. But I do think what pressurized fermentation does give you, I don't think it gives you that much of a different product between 0 PSI or 15 PSI, but it does give you a lot more CO2 in suspension. And so what was great is you'd be done pressurized fermentation, you'd cold crash that thing, and you weren't really worried about having to keep it on CO2 or anything as you're cold crashing, because it already had a lot of CO2 in suspension. It was already pressurized. And then you pretty much could turn around your beer a lot faster because it was already mostly carbonated whenever you were done. And so you just, keep it on CO2 for another 8 or so hours, and all of a sudden you have a fully carb beer. And so I just remember cold crashing, letting it sit for 24 hours and not hardly really haven't had much in the way of pressure, maybe keep it at 20 PSI overnight. And man, I was drinking beers pretty fast. So back in my pressurized warm fermentation lager days, I was turning around, beers in like under a week in some cases. So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. So look, I'm pretty certain I've commented several times that I just don't, understand why people view pressurized fermentation as some sort of a magical trick, that allows lagers to be fermented warm, which I'm sure came off as sounding like I was just unfamiliar with the scientific arguments as to why it works. I have certainly heard what Tristan is saying here, and that has contributed, admittedly, to my views on pressurized fermentation. I will repeat what I've said before. I'm not convinced that on our scale, our homebrew scale, 5 to 10 gallon, maybe even 15 gallon batches, that 13 to 15 PSI of pressure is having any impact whatsoever on yeast replication and ester development and anything like that. We have not been able to show that. Maybe on these grand, huge commercial scales, it does have an impact. I'm not arguing that it doesn't. I also don't care if people want to ferment under pressure. It is such an easy thing to do or not to do that go for it. My whole point is that we have done several experiments comparing a warm fermented lager that had no pressure to one that was fermented exactly the same under 15 PSI of pressure, and they are indistinguishable. My point is that maybe you don't need that excuse, that psychological, warmth and comfort to allow you to ferment warm just by doing it under pressure. Like, we don't need that. That's my point. It's not the to come across as like some jerk or whatever. You do what you want, man. Anyways, I do think pressurized fermentation is one of the more fascinating developments that have come up over the last decade in brewing, and we will be absolutely talking about it more on this show and doing more tests on it on the website as well. So thank you so much for that feedback, Tristan. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Brülosophy merch is available. Everything from t-shirts and hoodies to hats, fanny packs, phone cases, and so much more. By picking up some of our merch, not only do you get to wear your love of Brülosophy, but it's another way to support our efforts while receiving something physical in return. You can check out everything we have over at brülosophy.com/shop, then clicking one of those product images on that page, which will redirect you to our Dashery store. You can go directly there at brülosophy.dashery.com, which is linked in the description of this episode. Currently, we are offering all of our classic designs, though we do have plans to create some new stuff in the future. Again, click the link in the description or head to brulosophy.com/shop to get your Brülosophy merch today.
So, when I ask, what is Odoo? What comes to mind? Well, Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a suite of business management software that some people say is like fertilizer because of the way it promotes growth. But some people also say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. But then again, you could look at Odoo in terms of how its individual software programs are a lot like building blocks. I mean, whatever your business needs. Manufacturing, accounting, HR programs, you can build a custom software suite that's perfect for your company. So, what is Odoo? Well, I guess Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a fertilizer, magic beanstalk building blocks for business. Yeah, that's it. Which means that Odoo is exactly what every business needs. Learn more and sign up now at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
Shipping, billing, admin, payroll, marketing. You're managing all the things, so why waste time sending important documents the old-fashioned way? Mail and ship when you want, how you want with Stamps.com. Print postage on demand 24/7 and schedule pickups from your office or home. Save up to 90% with automated rate shopping. That's why over 1 million small businesses trust Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST to try Stamps.com risk-free for 60 days.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Are you noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers, so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't settle for higher rates. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/libsyn today. That's jerry.ai/libsyn.
Malt extract, the ingredient many love to hate and others refuse to move on from. It's an oddly contentious topic among brewers, which makes it difficult to talk about without getting into some opinions, like we discussed earlier, which may or may not be aggravating for some folks. So just, hear us out. Our intention is not to bug people here, but Will, you and I both have ample experience brewing with malt extract, as do many patrons of Brülosophy, whose comments we're going to be sharing throughout the episode as well. Why don't you start us off, though?
Yeah, so way back, I guess it was like 2010, 2011, I lived in a very interesting place. My wife was in the Army, and we lived in Guantanamo Bay Naval Air Station, Cuba. And so the beer selection there was a little bit lacking. Even though I knew the guy that kind of ran the exchange, he would kind of get some interesting things. But kind of you'd have Ice House and Miller Lite and Coors Light and Bud Light, and then you'd have the occasional Sierra Nevada, occasional Shiner product that would show up. But honestly, I was really into Belgians and English ales, which I still kind of am. Go figure. And so it was really hard to get those. And so my wife, after a friend kind of getting some kits for, I think it was for Christmas one year, she got me a homebrew kit. And so, and I don't even remember what store it was from. It was some homebrew store in Arizona that I think is still open. And I have the receipt for it all somewhere down in a box down in my garage somewhere that I could probably go find it out and sleuth all that info out. But it was an extract with steeping grains kit. And so it was an amber ale, which is, I think, where a lot of people with extract with steeping grains kit start, is with an amber ale. I mean, it's like the generic 101 from, 15 years ago. You always start out with extract steeping grains with an amber ale going into a plastic bucket. And I think part of it It was an infected mess. I'm going to be honest. It tasted like sour apples.
And that was the end of my LME experience.
Part of it, like it was a liquid malt extract, and I think it had like both the liquid malt, the amber liquid malt extract, because it comes in various colors. So I think it had an amber LME plus whatever steaming is in there. And I think part of the infection was due to user error, and part of it was like kind of bad kit instructions, because supposedly everything came with this kit that you needed, and they came with one step. Which one step does claim to have some sanitization abilities, but I think they're kind of overstated. And who knows if I used it properly to do that, because it's kind of like you use one step, you clean it and it sanitizes and gets clean and everything. And I kind of use it as that. And so I didn't have Star San or anything or Iota 4 or anything like that, which is kind of probably where things went really south. And so I did that. I got infected. Thankfully, after that batch, which wasn't totally terrible after it aged, it kind of tasted a little bit like a lambic kind of thing. And I had at least 2 people that really enjoyed it as kind of like a spontaneous fermentation kind of beer. I'm not sure I enjoyed it all that much, but other people did. And so that was kind of cool. But after that, I read Palmer's How to Brew, and I kind of, he does talk about all grain, but he talks quite a bit about extract brewing, at least in the revision that I had all those years ago. And I kind of took a lot of the sanitization and cleaning to heart, and then I kind of went back to the same homebrew shop and ordered a same malt extract, liquid malt extract kit. I think the second one might have been more of a stout kind of thing, and then I was able to actually produce a beer that was not totally infected and totally gross. And then eventually, we kind of expanded out, and I learned that Midwest Supplies was kind of a big thing back then. I think they're still around today too. I just think they're under maybe a different ownership. But I started ordering different kits from Midwest Supplies. So really, when I think about malt extract, I think about, especially getting started in my early days, is like I was really ordering like malt extract kits from Midwest Supplies or other online retailers. And I didn't have like a local homebrew shop or a local homebrew club. So it was all just kind of me figuring this stuff out through their instructions and through Homebrew Talk and the 1 or 2 other guys on the island. In fact, one of my good buddies to this very day, Kurt, I met him in Gitmo, and we met partly because we both brewed beer, and his wife was a vet tech, and my wife was a veterinarian. So his wife worked with my wife for a while, and so we're still really good friends with them to this day. In fact, we see them probably once a year, even though they live all over the place with the Navy still. So again, beer, a great way to make friends and make something to drink. But yeah, I just remember a lot of malt extract kits, and LME seemed to be the really predominant theme. Occasionally you get some dry malt extract in your kits, but it was definitely a lot of LME back in those days. And I've kind of since then moved away from, once I got into all grain, I moved away from the liquid malt extract, but I still have some uses for dry malt extract, which I get a feeling we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail later.
So safe to say though that your first few batches were liquid malt extract based, right?
Probably the first several years, because again, that's kind of what you knew. I didn't have you remember back in the day, when you talked about all grain, a lot of it was all talking about fly sparging. Yep. I wasn't about to be about fly sparging, because that was a lot of work. And then I think finally, about the time I got back to the U.S. a little bit later, batch sparging had become more and more popular. And so I got a cube and started doing batch sparging. And just to be honest, that's still kind of a pain, because you have a whole nother vessel to clean. It's not a huge deal, but it's just a whole nother vessel to clean. I remember these 6-hour brew days trying to do a batch sparge and get everything, going with that. And so to me personally, I like the convenience of malt extract. I didn't know any better at the time, and it all seemed to taste okay to me. Again, maybe I don't think I brewed any super duper IPAs. I wasn't into what IPA was necessarily back then, because a lot of IPA was just really kind of in that period of resiny pine coney, how bitter can we get it kind of time frame. Yeah. And I wasn't really into IPA back then. And so I think to some of the styles I was brewing, which were more English and more kind of amber ales and dark ales, it seemed to serve me okay. I remember making a Saison that I thought was kind of incredible once upon a time too. And I think maybe it was just because that was one of my first ones where I went back to the States from Gitmo and found a homebrew shop in Jacksonville, Florida, where we flew in and out of, and I was able to get the actual Saison yeast and hand carry it back without it like getting killed in like the 3-week shipping or 6-week shipping period back to Gitmo that would normally happen. So so I was pretty limited in what I could get in those days, because again, like Gitmo, it doesn't seem very far, but because nothing's going through Cuba, everything had to get on a barge in Florida and come around. And so you'd order something, and then like 6-8 weeks later it'd show up, and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to order this, but I'm glad I got this fishing rod now.
It's like 90% of my online ordering. Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, but now with Amazon, like Drunk You gets to figure it out in 2 days, not like a month.
Yeah. So my start off, me getting started in homebrewing. I've told the story in bits and pieces over the years. I was, working at a group home as a college student, and the guy that I worked with, my partner on this one specific Saturday, came in 15 minutes late and said that he was bottling his homebrew, and I was like, "What?" I didn't even know that was a thing. I was 21 at the time, had been really getting into craft beer already, and this guy comes in and basically tells me, "Look, you just go down to this store in downtown Bellingham called North Corner Brew Supply, and they'll sell you a whole kit and walk you through how to do it." That day, I drove to North Corner, and I'm talking to the guy behind the counter. His name was Mars. I'll never forget that. Really nice guy. And he explains the whole fly sparge process, 3 vessels. It's not as hard as it sounds, yada, yada. I was like, there's no way I can do that in my little, he was showing me photos. Like back then there were real photos that he took. And he used them for teaching purposes, and he's showing me, and I'm like, yeah, he's like, anybody can do it. I'm like, no. And he goes, well, the next best thing you've got is extract with steeping grains, right? So it's an extract base. You're going to make this concentrated wort. You're going to dilute it with water. That wort is also going to have some steeping grains in it, to add all the characteristics. I started off with an Irish red ale, which is basically an amber ale. So I'm with you on that one, Will. And the way North Corner did it, I haven't been into that shop in a long time. I should probably make a point to stop in at some point next time I'm up in Bellingham. But the way they did it is, nowadays, like you see cans of liquid malt extract or bags. I've received bags of it from More Beer in the past. The way they did it is they had these huge 50-gallon barrels on the side, and you would pick between their pale, their amber, the dark one, whatever, and you would just go pour it out the weight that you were getting for your recipe. It was really neat. And then then you take it home and use it. And so I was told by Mars, he's like, never use dry malt extract. It's crap. This liquid malt extract is as close as you're going to get to an all grain flavor. Now, here's the thing. Those first few beers I made, I think I was counting in my head. I think I made 12 LME with steeping grain batches of beer before I switched to all grain. Those beers were good enough to keep me brewing. I thought it was amazing that I could ferment something that was drinkable and gave me a buzz in my apartment, right? They had a telltale flavor that I always just presumed was homebrew flavor. Like, oh, this is the flavor that you get when you make beer at home. I started brewing all grain. I had never used dry malt extract. I picked up some DME for the very first time when I got into making starters, and that is all I used DME for. In my mind, LME, which again, liquid malt extract, we're going to say LME throughout this episode, and DME. LME was the superior choice. You went with LME if you wanted to make a quality beer. So I had told myself that flavor component that I'm getting in my homebrew is because of the quality of beer when it's made at home. And then I started brewing all grain, and that flavor wasn't there. And that's when I learned about homebrew twang and it being associated with LME. And then I started reading online about how this idea that LME is in some way superior may not be true. And I will just say, first opinion, I fully am on board with that. If I'm going to brew an extract beer or use extract at all, I'm using DME. I will not even buy LME unless it's for an experiment, which was the last time I bought LME. It was Maris Otter LME, and I compared it to an all-grain Maris Otter batch. Now, have I had LME beers since I started brewing that didn't have that twang? Yes, I'm sure I have. I think there are techniques people can use. I think the biggest factor when it comes to LME, in my experience, is freshness. And we have done. In fact, I think it was Malcolm Fraser did an experiment for Brülosophy where he compared old LME to a fresher LME, and there was a noticeable difference, not only in the way they tasted, per our blind tasters, but in the way they looked. That LME, that pale LME, was dark. and it was 3 years old, I believe, 3 or 4 years old, compared to this fresher LME that had that nice pale color. So something, stuff is going to happen over time with age. And, to me, malt extract has a place. I don't, here's another opinion. I don't think it's necessary for people to cut their teeth on brewing with extract. It is so easy to jump in these days to all grain brewing, especially if you're doing the brew in a bag route, that all the only difference is maybe about 45 minutes of extra time, which you're waiting for your mash to get done. Other than that, everything else is, I don't know what your thoughts are. Everything else is pretty much the same, right?
Yeah. So, we can get the stories later, but yeah, basically, to me, like, you're cutting out the mash, so you're saving an hour. Now, I do think with more modern methods like brew in a bag, it's a little more time. You can basically, be a little more time efficient with it. I think back in our day, the biggest hurdle was that impression that you had to fly sparge like pro brewers, and just getting that whole fly sparge system set up, like, that just seemed so daunting to me as a beginning brewer to even think about. That now, people are using electric all-in-ones, they're using brewing a bag on a stovetop. I think it's a different game today that people are walking into versus back when we were getting into where the conventional wisdom was you had to do it with a fly sparge.
Yeah, and that was the case. The reason I switched to all grain was because of batch sparging. I learned about batch sparging, and then it was only 6-7 years later that I switched to brew in a bag because of our experiments, and seeing how easy brew in a bag was. I started saying, out loud, there's no reason that we have to force new brewers to start with extract. I believe there are people like you and me who were brewing with extract, and even though those beers weren't great, they were good enough to keep us doing it. Now, I would say that our intention, our desire to brew wasn't just for the flavor thing. It was to have that something to invest energy in that's fun, a hobby. And that might have been a big part of the reason we kept coming back. I just think people overall they're going to have more fun and be a bit happier with all grain brewing. But I'm not saying that to say like you can't brew with malt extract. Again, you absolutely can. I've made great malt extract beers. I'm going to talk about some of those ones in the next segment when our focus shifts more to DME than LME. But let's move into some of our patron experiences. The first one comes from Pat Souza. Now, I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer. I pulled all of the comments that patrons left on this question on our Patreon. I pulled every single one of them, and then I just tried to separate them by LME and DME just to keep the focus from getting a little bit too out of focus. There's going to be some redundancy here, but I think each person does have a unique experience that they're sharing, and that's why we wanted to include all of them. So again, Pat Souza says, I started out with LME with steeping grains from kits from Williams Brewing in 1991. It was a great way to learn to brew and to learn what cleanliness actually is. Less equipment to clean, so less opportunities for infection. They had a range of LMEs from light to dark and even wheat. I don't recall any stale flavors, but it always seemed fresh. I moved to all grain, but have used their extract kits for steam beers for its consistency. I've also successfully used LME in barley wines to boost the fermentables. I've had beers at brew pubs that were from LME recipes that weren't stellar, but I chalk that up to a business looking to jump on the craft beer bandwagon without investing in learning the process. I see LME as another tool now, but it served me well when learning.
Yeah, I think your sentiment here, Pat, is exactly what most of us have as far as getting started and kind of using that as a process-based thing. I'm really impressed. Like, the cost of LME is really expensive for what it is. So I'm kind of impressed that any brew pub would kind of jump on that because LME is expensive. Maybe if you take in the whole equipment costs, maybe not, but it is much more expensive than just raw grain. But he mentions not noticing kind of that homebrew, that homebrew flavor, that off flavor. And so when you were telling your homebrew all flavor story earlier, I was reminded of a time. So I had a friend who sadly her husband passed, but he was a home brewer. And I guess like she had got him like this brewer's best kit that had been sitting on the shelf for I don't know how long. And she gave it to me to say, oh yeah, well you brew here, you can brew this. And the can was probably 6 months to a year past its like expiration date on this like can of light malt extract. And when I opened the can, the LME was black. Like just straight up black.
Yeah.
Because that stuff oxidizes. It turns. And so, I was just kind of like, whatever, let's just see what it does. Like, I don't know. What's it going to taste like? Just curiosity. Why not? It was free. It just cost me time. And so I did it, and you get that weird, funky homebrew flavor. So, and this was pale malt extract, black as anything in liquid, and maybe it would have been fine if it was fresh off the shelf, but it was kind of funky. Wasn't terrible tasting, but not what you wanted in your beer, probably.
Yeah, exactly. First off, cool on Pat for using Williams Brewing. They're such a cool company out of the Bay Area up there, and it makes sense to me that he would go with their steam beer for its consistency. Oddly enough, steam beer, also known as California Common, by the way. That is one of those styles I could see actually working fairly well with extract kits and even LME, because it is kind of leans into that amber style of beer, right? And I feel like the paler you go, the more difficult it is, at least in my experience, to get away from that extract flavor, especially LME. So a good Cal Common seems like a good one to go with there. And I wanted to comment as well on what Pat said about going into breweries that were using LME. We had I worked with a guy who started a brewery back during it was like 2011 when the whole craft beer boom was happening, and they started off their brewery using malt extract. The only reason they switched to all grain had nothing to do with quality. All grain's way cheaper. Extract cost pound for pound. It's a lot more expensive to get the same OG using extract than it is to use all grain. And I will say they switched to all grain and their beers actually became drinkable. Before that, they were like sugar bombs. They were just so sweet, and they tried to market it as like, oh yeah, we want it sweet. That's what people want. And I'm like, dude, no. They switched to all grain and their beers actually got good. I'm not saying you can't make a dry beer, with LME, but I do think all grain makes it a little bit easier. So thank you for that comment, Pat. Next comment comes from Espen, who says, LME was my entry into homebrewing. I made a few batches that came out okay, and it was cheaper than buying beer from the store anyway. I took a few years off before getting into all grain and have since realized it was mostly the yeast in the kits that were letting my LME brewing down. Interesting. I believe LME with good yeast and some fresh hops can make a decent beer. Personally, I won't go back to extract brewing because I enjoy the hands-on with the all grain, but I do keep some extract around for those times where I miss my OG.
I do think the yeast comment on this one kind of resonates, because I do think there was a time, especially, not to pick on Brewer's Best kits, but like some of those kits, there's just the yeast taped to the bottom of a can. And again, sometimes when you're buying that off the shelf, you don't really know how long it's been there. Per se, like I don't, all the expiration dates were kind of after you open the box, not before you open the box. And so it's always curious how long that yeast has been sitting there. So I do think there is something to the good yeast comment here, because again, I think some of those old school kits, especially from way back, were just using some cheap yeast that were just taped to the bottom of a can, and who knows like how long it had been stored at room temperature or hotter than room temperature, that could have really affected the viability of the yeast. And so I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is like, the shelf life, like I said earlier on LME, it does expire. And so unless you're buying it fresh, it's not going to be that great of a thing. But yeah, I'm kind of with him though. Like I said, my neighbor wanted to get into brewing, and so we kind of skipped the extract part and went just straight to all grain brewing a bag, just because it's easy. A paint strainer bag on a stovetop pot, and you're there, and with the 45 minutes an hour you save from not having to do a mash, honestly, the amount of control you have over ingredients and the flavor that you get from it's kind of hard to beat. So, but yeah, I like the yeast comment there. That's really, I think, what keyed in on what Espen had to say that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was my comment on this one too. I know we're talking about LME, but I have made LME batches with very fresh, high quality yeast, very fresh, high quality hops, good water that still had that extract thing that I get. Now, I wasn't, comparing them blindly. I'm the one who brewed these beers, so it could be biased. Like, I'll fully admit that. But I do think that back in the day, I mean, you used to hear stories about the early days of homebrewing. These guys would buy like extract in a can, and you take the lid off, and the yeast would be taped to the bottom, like a tiny little sachet of yeast on the bottom of the can lid. I could see that being a big issue in terms of fermentation quality that would impact flavor, notably, off flavors. So yeah, I don't disagree with what Espen's saying. That said, I still think with LME in particular, there is something about, now I haven't brewed with LME in 7-8 years, I think is when I did that experiment I referenced earlier. So it could be that they have continued to improve the quality of LME such that, you can get away with grain-like or all grain-like characteristics in those beers. So, all right. Owen Dawson says, I have far more experience with LME than I do all grain, about 15 years on and off using LME, very occasionally DME, and only 3 years all grain brewing. I was under the impression that LME was superior to DME for most of that time. I was rarely disappointed with the result, but also rarely completely satisfied. So each time I'd pick up brewing again, I'd add some adaptation to try to improve my process, steeping grains, hop tea, different yeast, dry hopping, kegging, water chemistry, and so on, all with LME. In the end, I was putting in so much effort trying to improve the resulting beer with diminishing returns, it was easier to just move to all grain in some ways. When I made the move, I had plenty of experience with most aspects of brewing, just not mashing. The strangest thing is that by the time I moved to all grain, I'd listened to so much Brülosophy and other sources, I had a fairly solid grasp of all the basics, as well as a decent grasp of some of the more technical things. I kind of wish I'd made the move to all grain sooner, but truth be told, I never really had a suitable space. Now that I own my own place, I finally invested in a burgeoning brewery, and my years of experience, even if it was only with LME, means that I'm able to turn out beers that my friends, family, and I can all enjoy, and I'm finally occasionally completely satisfied with the beers. Occasionally, he says. I think that's funny. Owen says that Brülosophy has played a massive role in that, so thank you, and keep up the good work. Well, thank you for that comment, Owen. Yeah, another one, starting with LME the same way that you and I did, Will.
Yeah, I think, again, did it make a reasonably good beer? Sure. Was it that perfect thing that you're looking for? And that was kind of, again, I think that's most people's experience with LME. It can make a really tasty beer, but it doesn't quite get you exactly where you want to go. And even with LME and malt extract in general, I mean, we're kind of told that the water chemistry is adjusted for us and however they mash it. So the control we have on some of that stuff is just kind of like not, you're losing a little bit of control with some of your water chemistry as far as in the mashing process. You're losing control on whatever fermentable was there. Like when you look at, extra light malt extract, what kind of Pilsner malt was used? And how is it degraded whenever you make it into a liquid or a powder in those processes? And so you're losing some of that control. And so really kind of, I think most of us landed where you did, Owen, where once we got to that spot where we can have control over all the variables, the grain and everything else, like that's kind of, you feel pretty good about it. But I think his experience is right there along with others. And again, 15 years of brewing, even if only the last 3 was all grain, you had a lot of experience with like what works and what doesn't work. It's just that last little piece of the puzzle was there. And so it sounds like it wasn't too hard for you to transition over. As a friend of mine said, brewing isn't rocket science, but you sure can make it into it if you want to. So,
that in every hobby.
So yeah, it seems to kind of coincide with what Owen's experience is.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I get, I like that Owen makes it very clear that, he was making beers that weren't bad, but they weren't like excellent. And now he's making more beers that are not bad, closer to excellent, but still has, we all brew beers that were like, that just didn't turn out the way that I was expecting it to. That's going to happen regardless. I don't think, and I want to get this out there now, I don't think LME will ruin a beer. I think there are creative ways you can use it to actually, I think LME makes great Belgian ales, for example. The yeast, that fermentation character really does, I think that's probably why Belgian ales got so popular back in the early days of homebrewing, is that, you can get away with some certain flavors that may not taste good in a Pilsner, but that, you get that fermentation character from a nice Belgian yeast, and hey, you got a good beer that you can't really tell was brewed at home or whatever. So next comment comes from Tom Sills, who says, I did a modified, quote, less than experiment comparing kits of Vienna lager, one all grain and the other extract, with my own grain recipe. The extract kit made the better batch. I just want to say better and best, those terms are subjective, but Tom is sitting here right now saying, look, I brew all grain. I made an all grain Vienna lager. I made an extract Vienna lager, and I like the extract one better. That's pretty interesting. I'm not sure I would be in the same boat, but maybe if I was blind to it, I would.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Like, he said, was he using like an amber extract? Because they have different colors, and so was he using pale and then using some kind of steeping grain to get the color up or get some flavor in there, or was he using like an amber extract and it was just all amber malt extract versus Vienna malt or something like that? And so I'm really kind of curious what the recipes were on this, because that is a not the way I would have thought it, but maybe better is the better batch took him a third of the time to make, and so maybe that's what made it better. I don't know. So that's kind of interesting, but I do believe that you can make really good beers with malt extract. I think it's possible to make some exceptional beers there too. But again, making a Vienna lager with your recipe versus a malt extract recipe, again, they may both be really good, but they're not going to be the same beer. I think there's any way to pull that off.
Yeah. I was trying to think back to my. I can look at the article and read what my thoughts were, but I'm trying to think back to my experience when I did the Maris Otter comparison, the all extract versus all grain, and I don't know if I would say that the LME was as fresh as it gets. I got it shipped from More Beer and used it within a week. I mean, it was good LME, Maris Otter LME. Now, I did learn after I did that experiment, I didn't even think to look into this, that Maris Otter LME is actually a blend of like pale LME with Maris Otter liquid malt extract. And I don't know why they do that. And I didn't confirm that with More Beer. I was told that and looked into it and saw that, yes, a lot of extract producers, these maltsters, will do a blend of it. And I would imagine that's for cost savings or something. So maybe that contributed to the differences that I perceived. But yeah, it sounds like, people are going to have their preferences, and the fact that Tom liked the extract Vienna lager better than the all grain one is interesting to me, but it also just speaks to the subjectivity of preference. So Brady Gilchrist said, I used LME for my first 2 years of brewing. It gets a lot of hate, but it's a controlled way of minimizing variables while I learned what I was doing and how different processes affected that final flavor. That's a good point. Brady continues on, I used light, amber, and dark for various styles. At this point in my brewing, it was more about the novelty of making it myself and always having my own beer to drink than it was the quality of the beer. It produced very drinkable beer that had a distinct, quote, homebrew flavor to it, but it still got me hooked on the hobby. This was 18 years ago, and I'm still at it. The more pathways there are to get into brewing, the better. I haven't used the stuff in a long time now, but I very much recognize the place it has in homebrewing. Man, I really appreciate Brady's sentiment on this.
Yeah, I think, again, whatever keeps you in this hobby, whatever makes it interesting, whatever makes it to a spot where it's enjoyable, I think that's the biggest thing. And if you're happy with what you're making with malt extract, then by all means keep doing it. I think something we've kind of talked about a little bit is like different ways of packaging. When I worked at a homebrew shop, it seems like a long time ago, we had like giant jugs of malt extract that we would put in plastic bags for people to weigh out. Midwest Supplies and even like Northern Brewer, I think now they send it to you in like milk jugs almost, where it's like half-gallon milk jugs versus like the canned stuff. And so I'm always kind of curious, which packaging is actually better or are going to give you like a better product. You would think having it in a can would be potentially better for like keeping oxygen at bay, but my experience with the canned stuff, maybe just due to shelf life and it being on the shelf too long, has always given me more of that homebrew flavor than what I recall having it from the bag or from the milk jugs. So
yeah,
I think maybe that's just like, maybe it's because when you get it in a bag, they're pouring it off of some big fresher batch than you would get otherwise. And then also like light, amber, and dark, again, kind of the, like if you bought Briess malt extract, you're going to get, something from their Pilsner malt probably. But, when you do amber, like what are they doing to make it amber? Are they using Munich malt? Are they using, crystal malts in there? Like what exactly are they, or caramel malts, I guess, if it's Briess, like what exactly are they putting in there to make it amber? And I'm always really kind of curious about that. And even when I look at their spec sheets, like you can kind of see some of what they're doing, but you can't quite see all of what they're doing. So I'm always very curious, like the behind the scenes of like what would make it sweet malty caramel. You would just assume that they're using caramel malts or something in there, but are they using like all of a Munich malt? I don't know. And so again, that level of control still kind of gets me. I don't know. I guess I'm a control freak of a brewer now, but that level of control kind of like of what I'm putting in there kind of bothers me. And then also the possibility of getting that weird stale malt extract flavor in your LME batches also kind of puts me off from wanting to use it too.
Yeah, I like the comment on controllability and consistency. I agree on some levels that when you buy malt extract, there's a level of consistency with that's going to offer or afford some level of comfort. Like I know that when I add this many pounds of LME, I am more or less going to hit this, OG. The problem is, while you get that level of controllability, you are losing, or you're sacrificing, I should say, it's like a trade-off of other parts of things that you can't control. For example, like you were saying, Will, the types of grains that were used to produce this liquid malt extract. You're putting that in the hands of the maltster, the producer of this extract. So again, everything is a trade-off. But I do like what Brady's saying, and I agree that extracts have a place in homebrewing. I do not hate them. I may not prefer them over all grain, but they absolutely have a place. And for those people who like the flavor of LME, like Vienna lager extract beers, by all means, use it up. So John Hiller says, I used LME for my first 2 batches, and they turned out great. I switched to all grain for more control. There you go again. I think LME makes great beer, but for me, it takes away from the nerdy, gritty experience you get with all grain and just gives you less control. This is a good perspective as well, because it's not talking about the quality necessarily of the beer, but the quality of the experience of brewing. And I think for a lot of us, you and I included, Will, we've already mentioned it as well, that all grain, in addition to, for me, making a better quality product, which I do believe it does, it's also just more brewy overall. You feel like you're getting your knuckles deep in the real side of brewing, as opposed to allowing somebody else to take care of half of the process for you. Again, I'm not judging that. I like that nerdy, gritty part just the same way John does.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like the best analogy, and maybe this works better for dry malt extract than liquid, but maybe it's like the pancake mix kind of analogy, where you can buy the stuff that's all pre-mixed so you can go make pancakes, and that's fine. But you can also just take the individual ingredients, your flour, your leavening agents, whatever you have, and make pancake mix. There's nothing mysterious about it. Like, what goes in the back end of it. It's just that this kind of skips a step. So I can see where it makes it more consumable, but again, I'm with him. Obviously, I like to have all the ingredients at my disposal to be able to kind of get it to where I want to go to and have that control. So I'm definitely with John, but I would be curious. So it'd be kind of fun if you had like a homebrew club based thing, or maybe like a local homebrew shop, if they still exist anymore, to go in and do like a malt extract kind of competition to see if you could really turn out some of these, like have an LME or a DME category maybe, or maybe just mix them all in with everybody and just do the styles. But it'd be kind of cool to have a competition where you had some LME, DME, and then all grain people kind of competing, and you knew that there was at least a percentage of each. And maybe you're competing with yourself and having other judges do it. But it'd be kind of cool to see if you could get equally as delicious beers. Maybe not the same beer, but delicious beers.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it too. They might not taste identical, but they could be equally as good a quality, Yeah, I think that's good. All right, final comment for the liquid malt extract segment comes from Arthur Olcott, who says, I've been all grain brewing for years, but over the past year, I've done 3 LME kits, mainly just to get something into the fermenter with the minimum of time and fuss. The first one, a hoppy lager, had a sharp metallic twang that was just drinkable, he says. The next 2, unfortunately, were drain pours. They both had a strong, meaty stock reduction type flavor and really were very unpleasant. I'm not entirely sure how or what caused it, as I never have any issues like that with all grain. Needless to say, I doubt I'll ever do another LME kit, reinforced by your own views on LME as shared over the years. Well, that's not what we're intending to do, but I'm with you, Arthur. That's sort of my experience as well, as I get these. I don't know if I would refer to it as metallic. I've certainly gotten that when using LME, but to me, it's just this like back of the tongue, twangy. I don't want to use twang because I feel like it's overused, but maybe there's a reason it's overused. It's like this sharp, unpleasant experience on the back of my palate.
So I think twang is more there, but he said kits, and I'm focusing on kits because some of those like meaty stock reduction flavors kind of remind me a lot more of maybe bad yeast health and some of those things. Because again, earlier we talked about yeast and like the need for good yeast, and so depending on what kits you were, if they were some kit that, like we said, had the yeast under the lid for the last 3 years and they weren't stored at any kind of temperature, I mean, you could have been battling not just weird malt extract twang, because I don't think I got meaty or stocky even from the one that was like forever and a year old. It was sweeter than it needed to be, and it did have some twanginess to it that was, I wouldn't even say it was unpleasant. It just wasn't desired. Like it didn't taste bad. It just wasn't the taste I desired to get from what I was trying to do. But some of those like other descriptors kind of remind me of maybe you just had some bad yeast that came with your kits, and having bad yeast with those kits can really also affect the end product. So maybe you had a combo loco here, and then once you started doing all grain, again, you tend to start, once you get into all grain, you tend to do fewer kits and tend to do more raw ingredients. And once you're doing that, you're also getting your own yeast that's probably hopefully from a little bit better source than the under the lid of a can of malt extract. So that's kind of where I'm going with this, at least the way I'm reading it.
Yeah, the other thing that we have not really hit on yet is the quality of the hops in these kits. I have made beers that have notable old school homebrew twang, even though they were made all grain. And it was when the one that I'm thinking about the most that did this the most was when I compared old Simcoe hops to fresh Simcoe hops in a pale ale or something. That old Simcoe, and they were like old oxidized Simcoe hops. The packaging had a hole in it, so they were stored warm. All this stuff. That definitely had that reminiscent, just that old, gross, overly bitter, like that beta acid bitterness, twangy thing. And again, it was made all grain. So I do think that there is kind of a stacking, that happens, like maybe the LME plus old yeast plus really bad hops. You're going to get a beer that it tastes like some guy made it in his bathtub, basically. So, but focusing specifically just on the LME, it sucks that Arthur had to dump 2 beers that he made with LME. I do wonder to what extent, it sounds like you do too, Will, it was actually the LME that caused that, or if there weren't other factors. So
now that you mentioned the hops, it kind of reminds me of that expired Brewer's Best kit. Like it had hops in it, and they were sealed and everything, but they were, again, so old that when you peeled them open, they were just basically like, you could smell that they weren't good. So again, like you said, how many of these are just kits that were maybe a certain brand that were sitting on a shelf without any refrigeration for far, far too long? And so that kind of brings back to that whole, what if we treated LME with the same intent and desire as we do with our all grain stuff? Could we still make a reasonably, better beer? Maybe not world class, but an exceptional product versus maybe some of these, shelf kits that have been on the shelf for far too long.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that we're going to take a short break. That was our focus on that one was mostly on liquid malt extract. When we come back, we're going to be shifting our focus to our experiences using more dry malt extract, DME, as well as those of patrons.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Most people overpay for car insurance, not because they're careless, but because switching feels like too much hassle. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
We spent the first part of this episode focusing primarily on LME, so for this next segment, we are going to share our experiences using DME. Will, kick us off.
Yeah, so Brian Stevens writes in. He says, I always keep DME on hand for upping the gravity on beers that require a higher OG so I don't have to deal with the constraints that come with mashing an overly large grain bill and a not large enough mash tun. And of course, for yeast starters as well. Also, lest we forget about Canoe Chuck, the NHC Finals 2021 gold medal winning American lager by Ben Amadon that was made with all Pilsner, dry malt extract, and rice solids. I've brewed the recipe multiple times, and I'd wager brew day is done quicker than even the shortest and shoddiest. No mashing.
Yeah, I've heard about this Canoe Chuck stuff, and I remember when somebody told me that it was made with DME, I was like, I mean, this was 5 years ago now. 4.5. And I was like, wow, that's awesome, man. I'm so glad that people are showing that you can, that the quality of DME these days is as good as it is. So I'm going to share my experience over the last, let's say 10 years using DME. And the reason it starts only 10 years ago, even though I've been brewing for longer than 20, is because I never used DME until I switched to all grain. Why is that? Because I only used DME for starters until I was challenged to brew an experiment comparing DME to other methods of brewing. And in doing that, what I found was that, yes, you can absolutely make a, not even just a passable, but a very good beer using dry malt extract. And I have done that. I was shocked when I did a very simple, this wasn't even published on the website. I was just testing out a theory. I had a bunch of leftover DME because I stopped making as many starters. We switched to using imperial yeast, which 200 billion cells is good enough for most of my beers. So I decided I'm going to use this in a really simple single hop, dry malt extract batch of beer. That batch of beer went down so easy, did not have extract twang. Did it taste like an all grain beer? Again, it could be bias at play, but it was good enough. I don't know if I would say that it tasted like an all grain beer, but I wasn't upset with the way this turned out. And like Brian is saying, you think about the fact that the NHC gold medal winning American lager was made with dry malt extract. I think there's something to be said about the usefulness of something like DME.
So Brian uses DME a lot like how I like to use DME, which is saying that I like to use it on really high gravity beers. I've made more than one like Imperial Stout or Dark Strong or something that was beyond the capacity to make a 5-gallon batch in my electric all-in-one. And so to me, I could either do some weird things like reiterated mashing or some other kind of other ways of doing it, but I found it just as easy as to just integrate dry malt extract in there. Just get the palest thing that you can get, throw it in there, and honestly, those beers have won awards. Nobody said anything about me using dry malt extract in there. So I just integrated it into the recipe from the get-go. I found that when I did reiterated mashing, I was using DME as a Band-Aid anyways because I still wasn't hitting whatever gravity I was going for, so I ended up adding DME anyways. So I think it's a pretty cool way to just kind of offset your especially if you have like an electric all-in-one where you're limited in your grain capacity, that you could just totally throw in some DME during the boil and it just, brings you right back up to where you're going to. And I am in no way surprised that somebody used Pilsner DME and rice solids and had a great American lager because, again, American lagers don't really taste like much and extra light DME doesn't taste like much outside of beer, and so I could totally see yourself getting in there and just making it that way. Like that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's something I should look into doing here in the future just to play with, or maybe I do a DME and rice solids versus a Pilsner malt and rice solids experiment and see what happens.
Oh, dude, I think that'd be fun. We have the reason we settled on this topic for this experience episode, by the way, is because of feedback that we got. I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. From a patron of ours who was saying, hey, I love what you guys are doing. It's so helpful, but a lot of us are still extract brewing. And I thought, you know what? We don't focus on it very much. We have a lot of opportunity in terms of experiment topics for using extracts. I don't believe we've ever done a DME versus LME experiment. What the hell? That's an easy one. And, we are lucky enough to be sponsored by Northern Brewer, who they provide us our malt and have told us, they've told me, if you guys want to do extract stuff, if you want to do, malt versus extract comparisons, all grain, we've got you covered. So the opportunity is there. I really think we do. We need to start touching on some of that stuff. Adam L says, I started brewing all grain 1 gallon batches and quickly moved to 5 gallon all grain batches. After my first child was born, I was running short on time and energy. I listened to James Spencer's 15-minute Pale Ale episode and was inspired to try it out. James Spencer from Basic Brewing Radio, by the way. Now it's a regular tool to keep fermenters full. I'll also use DME for high gravity beers to boost the OG. The last big beer I made was a Dunkel Rogan Doppelbock.
Now, I love the idea of these 15-minute pale ale recipes where just literally, especially if you just want to try a hop, how easy is it just to brew up like a gallon or 2 gallons of just like DME, get it up to whatever 1056 or whatever OG you want, and then you can just add like a couple of late edition hop, like a 15-minute edition hop when you start the boil, a late edition hop in there, and then maybe even just dry hop at yeast pitch just to see if you could get your mind around some hops. And this is a really easy, really quick way to get your head around some of that. And so it's really cool that Basic Brewing kind of got people on that. But again, like I said, he's 100% using DME how I currently use DME, which is just making sure that, if I'm going to have a big OG beer, I can just offset those lost gravity points. Although I will say that for some of my Belgians, I've also just resigned myself to just adding an extra half pound of sugar to offset it too.
Yep.
I am guilty of that as well.
So that's what I was going to say as well. You're going to hear more as we move into DME from LME. You'll likely notice that this is where people start talking about using DME as a supplement to all grain batches to boost the OG. There's no secret that higher OG beers, you tend to get that there's a negative correlation between efficiency or conversion efficiency and OG, right? The higher the OG, the lower your efficiency. It can be difficult to hit those numbers. So throw in something that you don't have to mash, that just is sugar. And DME is one of those. LME is one of those. But so is table sugar. And what I've found, I don't make that many high OG beers anyway. I like, that kind of 1050 to 1060 range is my sweet spot. So I don't have an issue hitting my numbers with those beers. But when I'm making something like a double IPA, I am not reaching for more malt flavor. I want sugar in there just to boost the ABV while maintaining that crisp, light mouthfeel and flavor profile that I expect in a good, a double IPA. Same thing with Belgians. I'm looking for a nice dry, 8.5 to 9% double or whatever. I don't need DME in there to do that. I'm going to use sugar to do that. So it's an interesting, it's an absolutely valid approach that I know a lot of people are doing. It's just not something that I'm going to use DME for. I haven't had DME in my house in over 5 years. And that's only because the main reason I kept it around was for yeast starters, like I said earlier. And I'm not making yeast starters much anymore now. And when I do, they're vitality starters that I'm using just remnant, wort, all grain wort to build. So, all right. Next comment comes from Scott Pearson, who says, my only experience with DME and LME comes from an India Pale Ale, and he put that in quotes, brewer's best kit that I made for my first brew about 6 years ago. I remember the beer being just all right, underwhelming, and the flavor was slightly disappointing. I will say it was a very approachable way to brew for the very first time, and I enjoyed the process so much that I decided to jump in feet first to brewing with all grain. I think that's where the benefits really end for DME and LME. They offer an easy, affordable option to test the waters of the hobby out before doing what we all inevitably do and pump heaps of disposable income into our passion for beer making.
Yeah, I think when I think of DME and LME, especially early on, I'm thinking of like kits that we all use to kind of get into it. Back in the day, there were the Mr. Beer kits that basically had malt extract in there. And then now we even have like Pinter, which is a similar vein to those, which is just kind of the all-in-one vessel that you can ferment and then serve beer out of. But it's basically, I think it's more of a liquid malt extract kit. But it's kind of a good way to like test the waters of the hobby. I will say that for some people, they probably put their toes in and decide that this is as far as I want to go, and they just say they did it, and then they get out. Others, like the rest of us, kind of go full blown over the top, and we're just like diving into it and going crazy. So either way, I think anything that gets you into this hobby, keeps you in this hobby, whether it's dry malt or liquid malt or going all grain, if it's what keeps you going and keeps you in there and you're happy with whatever it is that you're making and consuming, then by all means just keep doing it, because I think that's kind of it. But I do agree. For some of us, it kind of makes as much sense, especially with brewing a bag with just a paint strainer and a stovetop, pot. And you can probably use a pot that you already have if you want to make small 1 gallon batches. I feel like sometimes those kind of make just as much sense anymore, though, as the extract.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. All right, next comment comes from Steven Ousts, who says, the only thing I use LME for right now is yeast starters. I'll use DME for starters only if I don't have LME on hand, because I try to save all of my DME for beers where I undershoot the pre-boil gravity by more than 5 points. I haven't purchased LME in over a decade, as I've been salvaging the LME from recipe kits I get as prizes from homebrew competitions. That's a pretty genius way of acquiring your LME there, Steven. I will say that I very rarely hear from people who prefer LME for yeast starters, but it sounds to me like what he's saying is that he doesn't want to waste his the good DME on yeast starters, because he uses those for his beers, right? And that he's got this LME anyways, so might as well just use that for a starter, which is a pretty smart way to get rid of LME that you're not going to use to make beer with.
And it's such a small amount of extract that you're going to be using compared to the whole volume of the beer you're going to be making, that even if you did have some kind of twang, I can't imagine it really carries over very much, if at all. So I think that I agree. I think this is a great usage of using liquid malt extract, and especially from recipe kits. And then some of those kits, they come with like milk jugs. So how easy it is, just pour some off into your Erlenmeyer flask or whatever, and then seal it back off with a plastic cap. Now, if you're doing cans, maybe it's a little more difficult or a little more problematic. But again, if you have something like a milk jug or something like that, it would be super easy just to pour some in and cap it off and do all that. But I think in general that the DME, the main reason I use that over that is just because it's something I still have probably the same 3 pounds that I haven't used in a long time on my shelf, and it's still a powder. It's still good to go, and like just the shelf life on that dry malt extract is just a little bit longer. And I feel a little bit weird using black pale liquid malt extract in my starters, no matter how little is going in there. It just feels weird to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. Part of the reason that I like DME more than LME overall is that it's just cleaner. Yeah, you get a little bit of the powder kind of wafting up in the air when you're pouring it. But LME, every time I've used it, I think I've used it 3 times since I started Brülosophy. It's like spider webs go flying out, the little thin strands of that sticky liquid malt extract, and I could not clean it from all the little places that it went to in my garage. I was like 6 months later, I would go and I would touch something, and it would have this sticky little line of liquid malt extract on it. It's just, to me, it's just not as easy to use. So that's another, for me, a benefit of DME over LME. All right, Mike Lula says, my only experience is with DME for making yeast starters, which I honestly try to avoid doing. I've never brewed with extract. My brewing mentor was an all-grain brewer, so that's the way I learned and stayed. Mike's comment makes me think of my brother, Marco, who I taught, how to homebrew, 12 to 15 years ago. And it was all grain. I mean, we built him a batch sparge, converted cooler mash tun. He had the propane burner and the big kettle, so we weren't doing partial boils or anything like that. And so in my brother's mind, he and I were just hanging out up in Seattle a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the brewing and how he's never made an extract batch, but he's aware of it. And to him, it's like, why would you do that when it's so easy to brew all grain? Part of that is just because of his experience in the way that he was taught how to brew. And it sounds like Mike is in the same boat.
Yeah, whatever gets you in and keeps you there. And it sounds like if you had a good mentor that could kind of like, show you the way, that's pretty great. Like for me, I was in the middle of the Caribbean and didn't really have any good brewing mentors to go with. And the ones that I was hanging out with, we were all making malt extract beers anyways. So we were all kind of doing the same thing at that point in time. So I'm with him, but I think using DME for yeast starters, that's probably the most common thing you're going to see for all grain brewers, is just keeping around for yeast starters and maybe that missed gravity from time to time. So, so that seems to be the way to go. Like, either get into your batch sparge like your brother did, or do brew in a bag on a stovetop like I try to get my neighbor to do. And that seems to be the way for most.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jason May says, I started with extract DME to be specific. I made a California comment. So interesting that the style that has come up more than once in this episode is Cal Common. But Jason says, I made a California Common that sucked and a cream ale that was merely serviceable. Both had weird off flavors, plus I decided it wasn't very fun, and all grain seemed so much more interesting, so my brewing partner and I transitioned over. Our next beer was one of the best Hefeweizens we've ever had. We never looked back, and we blamed the DME. We've only been doing this for about a year, but we found that beers with more yeast character did really well with our system. It was only after we really locked in our process and confusingly had a stout turn out tasting like cabbage that we realized it may not have been the DME. We got a water test done and found it had unhealthy levels of nitrates, leading to crazy off flavors in beers without much yeast character. Turns out it probably wasn't the DME. I'm still not going back, though, as I see no reason. We did order water salts immediately and switched over to distilled water, though. I love how he started this off admitting that he was blaming DME, and that's probably because it is so often seen on brewing forums, heard on podcasts like ours, that malt extract is not superior to all grain, that it would be easy to scapegoat the malt extract. But in this case, it looks like that may not have been what was causing Jason's problems with his beer.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm actually just glad he got it figured out. Like, I agree. I don't think the DME was probably the culprit of making like a really terrible Cal Common. Again, amber ales for the win, right? Or amber lagers, whatever we're going to call a Cal Common, probably an amber ale. It's as close as we're going to get. And so to me, it seems to be, it's so funny that amber ales where everybody starts here, Cal Common or just American amber. It's so funny. But yeah, I'm kind of with him. I don't think that the flavors you're describing were probably due to DME, because in my experience, like DME is pretty easy to work with, and it has a pretty consistent flavor to it. But I would say I'm really glad that you figured out that your water has unhealthy levels of nitrates, and I do the same thing. I have such hard water here in South Texas. There's we get it from an aquifer, so there's so much bicarbonate in it that it's really hard, and so I tend to just get RO water bought from the store, and then build it back up with brewing salts, because to me that's way simpler than trying to dilute it down or try to acidify it and do all those weird things. So I'm glad you got it figured out, and it turns out that water chemistry is really important still.
Should we go down that rabbit hole? Oh, we will, and we have. Mike Roca says, my first brewing experience was with an extract kit from the LHBS, that's local homebrew shop. I grew up with an old school Italian dad who didn't pay much mind to sanitation when it came to his winemaking, so I didn't either. On top of this, I didn't pay mind to or know about oxygen exposure. Needless to say, my beer turned out horrible. Fast forward to the present, I got another kit, minded my P's and Q's, and it turned out drinkable, but it missed the mark for me. So I got into all grain and never looked back. Now I only use DME for yeast starters and agar plates for isolating wild yeast.
Yeah, I think the agar plates is a really interesting place to put it, because again, you're just trying to isolate yeast and build them up, and so that's a pretty cool use for it. I think is just using it there to kind of build up some of those individual cultures. That'd be kind of fun, but I remember, again, I was brewing out of plastic buckets, and when I dry hop beer, I was just popping open the bucket and throwing it in there. I was talking, this was a couple years ago, and Dick Wallace, who's a friend of mine he's been quoted on here a few times, and now he used to live in San Antonio, now he lives in Colorado. But we remember talking about the beers we made when we first started brewing forever ago, and how we used to think they were decent, and that if I probably went back and drank those beers, I'd probably think they were so horrid because of how oxidized and how many different things that I did not do properly, even with water chemistry, and I can kind of look back to when I started really minding my water chemistry and really diving deep in onto it, that where my actual brewing quality changed. And so I don't know that the DME kits or whatever were a part of making my bad beer as much as maybe if I treated those same kind of ingredients with the same, sanctity and process that I do today, maybe they would have been a totally different experience. But I think, again, oxidation definitely is a very big problem for early brewers as they're going from our buckets.
Yeah, absolutely. And people don't realize, I say that sounds kind of arrogant. A lot of people, I don't think, recognize that when they're tasting their beer and they get something off, the impact that oxygen can have on that. I was blown away when I finally realized that these flavors that I was getting in my beers weren't there when I started employing processes to reduce oxygen exposure to my beer. It's crazy the impact that can have. So that is one as a side, recommendation. If you're not, as Mike says, minding your P's and Q's when it comes to oxidation, that may very well be the issue. And that's going to take place whether you're using extract or all grain. So Bill Blakesley says, I only use DME for yeast starters and as a way to get over a mash efficiency limitations when making high gravity beers. I always use the lightest stuff I can get my hands on. Yeah, we've heard from a lot of people now, and I'm with Bill Blakesley. DME for yeast starters. If I'm making a starter, that's how I'm doing it. And you've heard from several folks also saying that they'll toss it in if they're not hitting their OG in higher OG beers. Cool. What I like that Bill said though, and that we haven't really commented too much on, is that he always uses the lightest stuff he can get his hands on. That is me too. I will get Pilsner DME every single time. You can get extra light, or extra pale, some people call it. That's great as well, but I always go for Pilsner because it's the lightest flavored. It to me, it is the best blank canvas for you to paint on with hops and yeast.
Yeah, I tend to gravitate towards, again, the extra light or the Pilsner, whichever one they call it. I guess it just kind of depends on like what brand you're getting. But yeah, I always tend to gravitate that way as well. Again, I brought this up earlier with liquid, but it applies for dry malt extract as well. It's like when you buy amber DME, like what did they use to make it amber? Did they use Munich malt? Did they use caramel malt? What exactly did they use? And even if you go to BEERience and look at what they're showing there, they don't quite tell you exactly what they use. They just tell you it's going to be sweet, malty, and caramely.
Yeah,
and so you got to take it at their word. And so I could see. I think it's like even when I did extract beers, I still did typically lighter malt extract, maybe with a touch of amber ones if that's what came in the kit. But a lot of that flavor and stuff you're getting from your steeping grains, and a lot of that color and flavor from your steeping grains. Because again, I think that's a better way to get some of that dark color and dark character versus trying to guess whatever it is they put in their dark malt extract.
Yeah. I can honestly say I've never used anything other in terms of LME. Actually, same for DME. I've never used anything darker than like the pale extract. I've never gone amber. I certainly never did like their stout or their dark extract, because the way that I was taught, by Mars up in Bellingham was you'll get that from your steeping grains. And so you don't know what they're using or their processes or whatever to make that extract. Might as well just take control of that yourself. And so that's the way I always did it. That being said, one of the older homebrewing methods was just mix up some extract, pre-hopped extract, throw in some yeast and ferment it. And in that case, I mean, that doesn't sound very fun to me, but if you're making good beer that way, then keep doing it, I guess. Jeremiah Pickard says, I've used both and prefer DME. I've had issues with LME giving what I can only describe as twang, plus it's sticky, messier, and just all in all a pain in the ass. The only issue I've ever had with DME is my cat chewing a bag I left out. And let me tell you, that was a mess. I find DME to be more consistent. It stores a lot better, and it's a pretty good option when I want to make a small batch to test out a new hop variety, at least when I can keep it away from the cat. The hop testing thing, that's another Basic Brewing. I would imagine that was inspired by Basic Brewing. I know James was doing that, probably still doing that for his when he's testing out hops in those simple 15-minute beers. I think that's a beautiful reason to use DME, and it's so simple. You can do it on your stovetop. You can make little 6-pack batch sizes. That's awesome. I have never had a cat. Well, as an adult, we have dogs. So I can't say that I share your experience with the cat but I have dropped a bag of DME, and I share your frustration. That stuff is insanely hard to clean up well.
It is the finest powder ever.
My God.
It is the finest powder ever, and it goes everywhere. And then if it gets on that a stovetop burner or something, then it just immediately just like caramelizes and sticks to it for eternity.
It's awful.
It is literally the worst.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I'm going to kind of jump off of Jeremiah's comment here is that if you live in a place that gets humid at all and you plan to store that DME at all, don't open it. Keep it closed. Keep it in a sealed container. We don't get much humidity in Fresno, the Fresno area, at all, and I've had several, bags of DME just go rock hard, and it's you could probably let it sit in hot water for a while and it might dissolve. I just end up tossing it, just given the price of DME for fresher stuff. But that's a quick and easy way to ruin a bag of dry malt extract.
Yeah, I used to buy like larger bags of DME, and when you bought like the larger bags, if you like measured it out and cut it open, like I found that after 6 months or whatever, it would start getting like a brick. And so I am kind of curious, like if you had a brick of DME, not that I want to intentionally brick 3 pounds of DME, like how would that actually affect the impact of it? Could you dissolve it enough to make it to where it would still work out? So
Yeah.
it's kind of curious idea.
Yeah. All right, Rich says, I started with LME in the 90s for 3 years, then life and career interrupted brewing until I restarted with all grain in 2023. Welcome back to the fold, Rich. Fuzzy memories indicate the beers I made with extract were acceptable by then standards. Another member of my club currently brews exclusively with LME, and his beers are just as good as those from the all grain brewers. It's probably due to the technology used to produce LME, but like all brewers know, cleaning, sanitation, and adhering to a tried and true process makes superior beer. That is the fact that you've got a friend, Rich, who is only brews with LME and is consistently making beers that you perceive as being equal, if not better than beers made all grain. I have a few thoughts about that, but that doesn't matter. I think that's really, really a cool validation for the liquid malt extract brewers out there.
Yeah, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think if we would go back and instead of just buying these kits when we were beginning, and we like actually bought like however many pounds of LME we needed fresh from the store and got whatever yeast we needed and whatever hops we needed, from the fridge, and the freezers, instead of just, whatever was in this box or this kit that we got shipped to us or we went and bought off a store shelf. I think we took these same kind of ingredients and used the same kind of sanctity and process and method, like minding our oxidation, putting them in things that we can, not, a fermenter that doesn't have a heavy oxygen ingress, like a bucket with a faulty lid, we put them in kegs where we, CO2 purged the kegs and like pressure transferred into there after fermentation was over. And I think if we just really went with our great sanitation and low oxygen level processes, I think you could probably make a much better beer than what we were making back when we got started. But again, nobody talked about oxidation whenever I kind of got into it. That was kind of like a thing you thought about later. Nobody really talked about water chemistry when I first got into it. That was the thing that was like, if you're real advanced, good, like we always say, good enough to drink, good enough to brew with. Nobody really talked about all that. And so I feel like, again, if we just kind of went back with these same ingredients to treat it with the same sanctity, we might actually get a much better beer. And so it's kind of cool to read about somebody that's still brewing it this way and turned out some really great beers. And so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. When I got into brewing, I mean, it was early 2000s, and oxidation was like, first off, cold side oxidation. I'd never heard that term. Be gentle with your wort. Hot side aeration was a thing that came up every now and again. That was certainly more the bogeyman than cold side oxidation. You don't have to worry about it too much unless you're making lagers but no, it matters. And water chemistry, same story. If it's good enough to drink, it's good enough to brew with. Not true. If I've learned anything in my years of brewing and experimenting with beer, that is so not true. You make some of the biggest improvements that I've made have been just focusing on my water. On beers that I thought were great before, they're turning out world class when I just focus on my water and reduce that cold side oxidation. I have to imagine that if I were to make an extract batch, knowing what I know now, with the skill set that I've developed over the last 20 plus years, I think I could probably produce a very tasty, more than just passable or acceptable batch of extract beer. Maybe that's in my future. I'll have to think about that. All right. Final comment comes from Ricky Alexander, who says, I use DME in my traditional sours sometimes, and I'll occasionally use it to bump the OG of a high ABV batch. I also recently discovered that dry oat extract and really like it in my hazy IPAs. Cool one to end on, because he's mentioning two things that we have yet to address.
Yeah. So, honestly, I don't think I've ever used it in a sour, but it would make total sense. I mean, if you look at the Bavarian wheat DME that Breeze puts out, I think they say it's 65% malted wheat and 35% malted barley. And that seems like it could be a great base for a hazy IPA or even like a Berliner Weiss kind of, malt bill there if you wanted to use malt extract for that. So that seems like a pretty cool way. And then I'm guessing with the sour, you'd also get enough lactic acid in there and enough funk that maybe you're not going to notice a twang of sorts. Maybe that would be a desirable characteristic to go with all the funk. I don't know. I don't know if that twang ages out or not, but maybe that would be kind of an interesting thing. So that's an interesting idea. But again, and then dry oat extract, I don't think I've ever seen that. So, but that's a pretty interesting way to introduce oats as well. So, I mean, I'm kind of curious about all this. So that really sounds like a pretty creative and interesting way to use some of the dry malt extracts that are available and out there, and could really, be a really great way to do it.
Yeah. I love the idea of using DME for sour beers. I like how he calls it traditional sours, but he's using DME. So not really traditional. I have a feeling what Ricky's referring to is the fermentation process, that he's pitching bugs, maybe co-pitching bugs with some other sort of, sac, Cerevisiae yeast, and then letting them sit for a year or whatever. That seems like, I would imagine that DME, just the process of concentrating the wort down into a powder, may result in, a higher concentration of maltodextrins, which we know are a good thing in sour beers because it gives those bugs something else to munch on and thus produce their the character that we're after. Very cool idea. I don't make hazy IPA very often. I might be making one here shortly because I've got a lot of friends who love it. And the idea of using dry oat extract in my mind would be primarily for haze stability, and I don't see that as being necessary for hazy IPA necessarily. But great idea if it contributes to the mouthfeel and the body and maybe even the foam quality. I think that's a really neat idea. I didn't know there was dry oat extract. So by all means, give it a go if that's what you're after. And I just really unique ways of utilizing dry malt extract that we hadn't hit on yet. And I want to thank all of our patrons as well. We're to the end of this episode. Huge thanks for sharing your experiences. I feel like it really enriches these episodes to have more than just the two of us going on about our experiences with, with whatever it is we're focusing on. In this case, LME and DME. So massive thanks to our patrons. If you're interested in having your views, your experiences shared on these episodes, head over to patreon.com/Brülosophy. At the very least, take a look at what you can get for helping us to continue doing this. Will, did you have any final thoughts on your experiences brewing with extract?
No, I just think the main thing is mind your P's and Q's. Watch for oxidation, watch for ingredient freshness, make sure that you're using good yeast and good hops and fresh ingredients, and then I think you'll probably make a pretty reasonable product. And I think that's kind of the same whether we're talking about all grain or extract, whatever it is we're doing. But most of all, make beer that you like to drink, and then you'll be fine.
Absolutely. And I will finish on this note. I have absolutely had all grain beers that were worse than malt extract beers. And so this is not a show where we are expressing hate in any way. We have our preferences just like everybody else. But if you're making great beer with malt extract, you keep doing that. And that's awesome for you. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, The Brülosophy Show, where host Martin Keenan covers a bunch of fascinating topics in the world of brewing and beer. And remember to head over to Brülosophy.com to stay current on everything we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.